The crowd was screaming from the high walls, their alien voices echoing like thunder inside the stone arena. Below, the great gate of the Death Labyrinth opened with a low growl, spilling black mist into the air. Prisoners were pushed forward, stumbling on shaking legs. Everyone knew what waited inside. No one had ever returned. The labyrinth swallowed warriors, kings, assassins, even whole teams, but it had never released a single soul. And now, a human stood among them. Ethan's hands were tied behind his back with glowing chains that burned when he pulled. The aliens laughed at him. "Look at the weak one of them shouted. "He will die before the first corner." Another spat from above, green slime dripping down. Ethan did not answer. His eyes were locked on the mist, studying the faint movement of shadows inside. The others trembled, but his face carried a strange calm, like someone who had seen mazes before. A horn sounded. The chains on the prisoner's wrists clicked open. The guards shoved them forward. Ethan walked inside with the others, the heavy gate closing behind them with a final slam. The sound was like a coffin sealing shut. The air was damp and cold, carrying the smell of metal and rot. The stone floor was wet beneath his boots. To the left, a narrow passage twisted into blackness. To the right, stairs dropped down into green fog. In front, a wide tunnel glowed faintly red as if fire waited ahead. The prisoners shouted in panic, some running to the stairs, some pushing into the glowing tunnel. Ethan did not move. His eyes followed the walls. He saw lines carved into the stone, lines that shifted when the light flickered. The labyrinth was alive. The first scream came quickly. One prisoner stepped onto the first stair, and the stone crumbled like sand. He fell into the fog, his cries ending in a sickening crunch. Another prisoner rushed into the glowing tunnel, but spikes shot down from above, piercing his body like a rag doll. The crowd outside cheered, their voices carried into the labyrinth by hidden holes. Ethan stayed still, watching, listening, waiting. The walls trembled. A section to his left groaned and began sliding forward. It was not a wall anymore, but a crushing slab, moving to grind everything in its path into dust. The prisoners scattered like insects, running wildly. Ethan looked at the moving wall and then smiled faintly. It was just like the games he played as a child back on Earth. Sliding puzzles, carnival mazes, even the old video games where traps moved in patterns. This was no different, only deadlier. Instead of running with the others, he stepped closer. The stone slab screeched as it rushed toward him. Dust filled the air. The prisoners behind him shouted, "Human, run!" But he did not. He watched the rhythm, the pauses, the way the wall slowed just before locking into place. It was predictable. He took a breath, bent his knees, and jumped not away but sideways, straight into a gap that looked like death. For a heartbeat, darkness swallowed him. The stone scraped his back as the wall slammed shut inches behind him. Silence followed, then the muffled roar of the crowd outside. They thought he had been crushed. But Ethan landed on his feet inside a narrow chamber hidden between the moving walls. He touched the stone. It was smooth, polished, almost like it had been made for him to pass. A faint sound echoed, not from the crowd, but from deeper inside. A low whisper, like breath sliding across stone. The labyrinth was not just stone and traps. It was aware. It shifted not only to kill, but to test. Ethan felt the weight of its gaze, though there were no eyes. He moved forward. The passage twisted, opening into a wider hall lit by faint blue crystals. Broken bones lay scattered on the ground, alien skulls with empty eye sockets staring at him. He crouched near one skeleton, noticing something others had missed. Scratches on the floor, thin lines carved by claws or fingers, all pointing in the same direction. The dead had tried to mark the safe path. Behind him, another scream shook the air. A surviving prisoner had followed him into the chamber, but ran past, ignoring the marks. The floor opened like a mouth, swallowing him whole. His voice echoed until it was cut off by the sound of crushing stone. Ethan did not look back. He followed the scratched marks forward. The walls shifted again, stone blocks sliding like pieces in a giant game. Dust and sparks rained down. He ducked under a swinging blade that nearly took his head, pressed his back against a wall as spears shot out, then rolled across the floor just as spikes erupted upward. Every trap had a rhythm, a pattern. He only needed to find it. The hall ended in 3 tunnels. Each glowed with a different light, one red, one green, one blue. The air was hot and smelled of burning metal. He stood in front of them, hearing the whispers again. The labyrinth was speaking in its own language, daring him to choose. The wrong choice meant certain death. The other prisoners would have panicked, rushing into whichever tunnel seemed less deadly. Ethan did not. He crouched low, touching the floor, and feeling the vibration through his fingers. A memory rose in his mind. The fairs back on Earth, the mirror houses and fun houses designed to trick children. They always gave themselves away with small details. A floorboard too hollow, a reflection that blinked the wrong way, a sound that came half a second late. This was the same. The tunnels were illusions, but one detail betrayed the truth. He picked up a small rock and tossed it into the red tunnel. A burst of fire erupted instantly, burning the stone into ash. He threw another into the green tunnel. This time the sound of splashing acid filled the air, the stone eaten away. Then he looked at the blue tunnel. It glowed faintly, but gave no sound. He dropped a stone. It rolled forward, unharmed. He took a deep breath. The labyrinth was watching, waiting for him to make a mistake. He felt the sweat on his neck, the cold breath of the unseen whisper. He stepped toward the blue tunnel slowly, his hand brushing the stone wall for balance. Behind him, the walls groaned again, shifting restlessly like a beast angry at being tricked. He knew this was only the beginning. The labyrinth had more traps, more games, more ways to kill. But with every step, Ethan felt something powerful. This place was designed to test strength, speed, fear. But he had something the others did not. He had human tricks, old, simple, almost childish tricks. And that made him dangerous in a way the labyrinth had never faced before. Would you like me to now expand part 2, the first trick, into 900 words as well, in the same style? The air inside the labyrinth was heavy, thick with dust and the smell of death. Ethan kept moving, his steps slow but sure, his eyes never leaving the walls and the floor. Around him, the screams of other prisoners echoed through the maze. Some were cut off too quickly, the sound of bones breaking following after. Others dragged on in horrible wails before silence swallowed them. The crowd outside roared with every death, celebrating the suffering. But those voices only reached him as a faint hum. He shut them out. His focus was on the traps, the stones, the patterns. He had grown up on Earth with games, mazes on paper, puzzles in books, computer screens flashing with dangerous paths that only had one safe way forward. The labyrinth was far more cruel, but in its cruelty, he saw something familiar. Traps never fired randomly. There was always a rhythm, a rule hidden in the chaos. If he could see the rule, he could live. That thought calmed him, while everyone else ran like animals waiting for slaughter. A prisoner with scaled skin ran ahead of him, panting hard. He shoved Ethan aside and bolted toward a door at the end of the hall. Relief spread across his face when the door glowed faintly with white light. "Exit!" he screamed and pushed it open. The ground beneath him vanished instantly. His body dropped into blackness, his scream echoing until it was swallowed whole. Then the floor closed again, smooth as before, as if nothing had happened. Ethan crouched low and touched the stones near the door. They were warmer than the others, freshly moved. It wasn't a real exit. It was bait. More prisoners rushed past him. Panic made them blind. One stepped onto a clear patch of floor, and the stones shot upward like sharp teeth, impaling him through the chest. Another clawed at a wall, but the wall twisted open, swallowing him and snapping shut again with the sound of grinding bone. Ethan stayed behind, studying, searching for signs. That was when he noticed the scratches again, faint lines carved into the stone by desperate hands. Some were random, but some pointed in a direction. The dead had left warnings, and no one else had cared to read them. He pressed his hand flat on the cold ground and crawled forward, following those marks. They led him past a narrow archway, its ceiling low and edges sharp like blades. He threw a stone inside, and instantly the walls slammed together, crushing the rock to powder. He smiled faintly and moved the other way. The labyrinth thought it was clever, but it was showing its teeth too early. He only needed to be patient. The sound of metal grinding filled the air. Ahead, huge blades swung down from the ceiling, moving in perfect arcs like pendulums. The prisoners behind him wailed, refusing to go further. Some tried to run back the way they had come, but the path had already closed. The labyrinth gave no mercy to those who retreated. Ethan stood at the edge of the swinging blades, his eyes tracing their movement. Left, right, pause, swing. The rhythm was steady, not fast enough to confuse him. He waited for the pause, then stepped through with perfect timing, moving his body in small bursts, ducking, shifting, and sliding across the cold stone floor. Behind him, a prisoner tried to follow but stumbled. The blade cut him in half in a spray of blood. Ethan didn't look back. He only kept moving. The tunnel opened into a wide hall, brighter than the rest, lit by glowing red cracks in the floor. Heat rolled upward, burning his skin. The prisoners screamed and jumped back, but Ethan crouched low, placing his palm near the floor without touching it. The heat came in bursts, rising and falling like waves. The cracks glowed bright, then dimmed, then brightened again. Another pattern. He took a deep breath and ran, timing his steps to the rhythm. Each time a burst of flame shot upward, he had already crossed. Behind him, the others screamed again, some too slow, their bodies caught in the flames, their voices ending in choking gasps. He rolled across the final crack and stood on the far side, sweat dripping down his forehead but his body untouched. The crowd outside had grown louder. They had seen him pass the blades, cross the fire, survive what stronger and faster prisoners had failed. Their cheers were mixed with anger, disbelief. To them, this was impossible. To him, it was just a game with higher stakes. The air grew colder as he stepped forward again. The hall narrowed into a twisting corridor, and the stones under his boots changed. They were smoother, polished, almost too clean. His instincts told him to be careful. He bent low and studied them. Some had tiny cracks on the edges, faint but visible. He pulled a loose piece of bone from the ground and tossed it ahead. For a moment, nothing happened. Then spikes shot up so fast they shredded the bone into dust. He marked the safe stones in his head, memorizing their positions, and stepped only on those. The labyrinth hissed, the whispering sound echoing again through the walls, as though it was angry at him. The path finally opened into a chamber where the ceiling stretched high, glowing with faint purple light. The walls here were smooth and untouched, no marks, no scratches. Ethan froze, feeling the silence. It was too clean, too easy. That was when he heard it, a grinding sound above. He leapt to the side just as massive stone slabs crashed down, one after another, slamming into the floor. Dust and rocks exploded around him. If he had stayed still, he would have been crushed like the others. The slabs didn't stop. They rose again, then fell in another rhythm. 1, pause, 2, pause, 3. He lay on the ground, his body pressed flat against the cold stone, watching the order. Slowly, carefully, he rolled forward each time the pause gave him a breath of safety. The slabs smashed down inches from his legs, his arms, his head, but never touched him. He kept rolling until he reached the far side, pulling himself up onto his knees. His chest burned, his arms ached, but he was still alive. The chamber ended in 3 tunnels, each glowing with strange lights, red, green, and blue. The other prisoners still alive rushed forward, panicked and desperate. One threw himself into the red tunnel and was instantly burned alive, fire swallowing him whole. Another stumbled into the green one, his screams filled with pain as acid melted his skin. Ethan stayed behind, breathing hard, his eyes calm as they studied the last tunnel. The blue light flickered faintly, but he noticed no fire, no acid. He picked up another stone and tossed it. The rock rolled forward, unharmed. Behind him, the walls trembled again, the sound of grinding stone growing louder, angrier, like the labyrinth itself was mocking him, daring him. The whispers returned, closer now, curling into his ears. He ignored them. He stepped forward into the blue glow, his body tense, ready for another trap. But deep inside, he was certain. The labyrinth had rules, and he was beginning to learn its language. Would you like me to now expand Part 3, the living maze, into 900 words in the same suspenseful style? The tunnel glowed faintly blue as Ethan stepped inside, his boots echoing softly against the stone. The air was cooler here, almost damp, and carried the smell of metal and dust. For a moment, the silence was heavy, but then he heard it, the deep grinding of stone shifting somewhere close. The walls trembled slightly as if they were alive, moving to block or trap him. He kept walking slowly, every step measured, his eyes scanning not just the floor but the ceiling and even the walls themselves. Behind him, faint screams echoed from the tunnels he had left. The prisoners who had chosen the red and green paths were gone now. Their voices burned or melted until nothing was left. Ethan was alone. The labyrinth wanted it that way. The blue light guided him forward, but his gut told him the glow itself was not safe. Nothing here was ever what it looked like. He bent down, pressing his hand to the floor, feeling the vibrations again. The rhythm was there, pulses of movement, faint but steady. The corridor narrowed ahead, slanting downward into darkness. As Ethan approached, he noticed the light bouncing strangely. It did not follow the shape of the tunnel. He frowned, then remembered Earth carnivals, the mirror houses designed to trick children, lights reflected in strange ways, confusing the eye. He pulled a small piece of broken bone from the ground and tossed it forward. The bone clattered against the floor but vanished halfway into the glow. It had not fallen. It had been swallowed. An illusion. He stepped back, scanning carefully. One wall had faint scratches again, lines made by claws scraping stone, all pointing toward the left side of the passage. He smiled faintly. Someone before him had seen the trick too, but they hadn't lived long enough to escape. He pressed his shoulder against the left wall and moved carefully. The glowing floor to his right rippled faintly, as if it was alive, but he never touched it. Soon, the false light ended, and the tunnel opened again. This new chamber was larger, stretching high above his head. Blue crystals jutted out of the ceiling, dripping faint drops of glowing liquid onto the floor. The sight was almost beautiful, but the bones scattered across the ground told the truth. Skeletons of many alien species lay here, their fingers twisted, some still clutching weapons or scraps of armor. Ethan crouched by one skeleton, running his fingers across the bones. The alien had died trying to crawl toward a side wall. His nails had scratched long marks across the stone. Ethan leaned closer and saw something clutched in the alien's bony hand, a small object, sharp and black. He pried it free and turned it in his palm. It was a key, shaped oddly, with ridges like the teeth of a gear. The material was neither stone nor metal, but something in between, faintly warm to the touch. He slid it into his pocket, unsure what it opened, but certain it was important. The floor beneath him rumbled. The walls began to close in slowly, the grinding of stone echoing so loudly it shook dust from the ceiling. The chamber was shrinking. Panic would have made anyone run wildly, but Ethan stood still for a moment, thinking. If the labyrinth wanted to crush him, he had to do what others could not, find space where none existed. His eyes darted to the side. There was a crack between two walls, small and uneven, barely enough for a grown man to fit through. The bones of other prisoners lay nearby, their bodies too large to squeeze in. He sprinted toward it, pressing his shoulders tight, turning his body sideways. Stone scraped his arms and tore his shirt as he pushed himself through inch by inch. The walls thundered behind him, slamming together where he had stood moments ago. Dust choked the air, but he kept moving until he tumbled out onto the floor of a narrow, hidden passage. His chest burned from lack of air, but he was alive. The labyrinth had punished the strong, but his human body had bent and twisted where others could not. He lay still for a moment, listening. The whispers came again, clearer this time, curling in his ears. They were not real words, only sounds, but the meaning was there. The labyrinth was aware of him. It knew he was different. It was not just testing strength and fear. It was learning. Ethan pushed himself up and walked forward. The passage wound downward into a hall darker than the others. Here, the crystals were gone. Only faint red lines glowed across the floor, pulsing like veins. He crouched again, touching the stone. The vibrations were different here, irregular, shifting in uneven pulses. He realized with a shiver that the labyrinth was changing its rhythm because of him. It was no longer predictable. The ground ahead split into 3 more tunnels, each glowing faintly again. This time, all 3 looked dangerous. One filled with fog, one with sparks of lightning flashing across the walls, and one utterly black, without a single sound. Ethan's jaw tightened. The labyrinth was no longer offering a safe path among false ones. It wanted to force him into a choice where survival was impossible. He stood still, his eyes closed, thinking. The fog could hide gas or pits. The sparks were too obvious. Touching even once meant death. The black tunnel, though, its silence was strange, too quiet. But silence could mean emptiness, and emptiness was safer than what screamed danger openly. He picked up another stone, tossed it into the black tunnel, and waited. No flames, no spikes, no sound of crushing stone. Only silence. Ethan's lips curved faintly. "You're learning," he muttered to the walls, "but so am I." He stepped into the black tunnel, his hand brushing the rough wall, every muscle tense. Behind him, the labyrinth groaned loudly, the sound deep and angry. The whispers rose again, louder, as if the maze itself was furious at being tricked. But Ethan didn't look back. He walked deeper into the dark, feeling the key in his pocket and the steady beat of his own heart. The labyrinth could change its patterns, but he had something stronger than brute force or speed. He had the stubborn patience to watch, to learn, and to use the oldest tricks Earth had ever given him. That, he knew, was why he was still alive when others were bones at his feet. Do you want me to now expand Part 4, the death games, into 900 words in the same suspenseful way? The black tunnel seemed endless, yet Ethan kept moving, his hand brushing the wall as he walked. The silence pressed on his ears until even the sound of his own breathing felt too loud. At last, the path widened, and he stepped into another chamber. Here the air was heavy, carrying the stench of old blood. The floor was uneven, scattered with broken weapons, scraps of alien armor, and dried stains that spoke of many deaths. The labyrinth had prepared a cruel stage, and Ethan knew it. This was not a place for tricks alone. This was where the maze tested willpower. The ground trembled under his boots. From the far wall, stone slabs shifted, sliding apart to reveal hidden alcoves. From them, alien prisoners stumbled out, others who had survived different paths of the labyrinth. Their bodies were battered, their faces pale with fear. Some still carried jagged blades they had grabbed from dead skeletons. But no one trusted anyone else here. Every prisoner looked like a cornered beast. The labyrinth had pushed them all together for a reason. Without warning, the floor lit up with glowing red lines forming a circle around them. Then the voice came, not through ears but directly into their skulls. It was deep, cold, and cruel. Only the strong may pass. The walls shuddered as iron gates opened above them, and long spikes began to lower. The prisoners realized the truth. If too many stayed in this chamber, the spikes would crush them all. Only a few were meant to survive. Panic exploded instantly. One alien roared and charged at another with his claws, ripping flesh. Another swung a rusted blade at the nearest figure, the scream of metal cutting bone echoing through the hall. Blood spilled across the stones. Ethan's eyes narrowed. The labyrinth wasn't just full of traps, it was forcing them to kill each other. But Ethan had no intention of playing its game. He moved away from the chaos, pressing his back to the wall, watching. The aliens were bigger, stronger, some with sharp teeth or thick armor-like skin. Against them, a human should not have stood a chance. But he remembered something from Earth, games where the strongest player was not the one who hit the hardest, but the one who let the others destroy themselves. Patience and timing were better than brute force. He watched as the aliens fought. The biggest, a towering beast with 4 arms, crushed 2 smaller ones with brutal strength. Another, quick and slender, darted between bodies, stabbing again and again. The chamber filled with screams and the smell of blood. Above, the crowd roared with excitement. They wanted a show. They wanted suffering. Ethan crouched low, waiting. He picked up a loose stone and threw it across the chamber. The sound distracted one fighter long enough for another to strike him down. Ethan didn't need to fight them all. He only needed to survive. Slowly, the number of prisoners thinned. The floor was slick with blood now, the red glow making it shine. But the labyrinth had more cruelty waiting. The spikes from above stopped for a moment, then retracted back into the ceiling. For a heartbeat, the chamber was silent, the survivors panting in exhaustion. Then the far wall cracked open, and something far worse stepped forward. It was not a prisoner. It was a guardian. The creature was massive, its body a mix of metal and alien flesh. Blades jutted from its arms, and its head was covered with a steel mask. Red light glowed behind its eyes. With a mechanical hiss, it stepped forward, dragging claws across the ground, leaving sparks in its wake. The other survivors froze, fear breaking what little courage they had left. The labyrinth had turned the test into a final execution. The guardian moved quickly despite its size, slashing through the nearest alien and splitting him in half. Another tried to stab it, but the blade bent uselessly against its armored chest. The guardian grabbed the fighter and slammed him against the wall until nothing was left but pulp. Panic erupted again. The survivors ran, but there was nowhere to go. Ethan stayed low, watching. He knew he couldn't beat the monster with strength. He wasn't faster either. But he had seen creatures like this before, back on Earth, though not real ones. Bulls in Spain, games in arenas where matadors used red cloth to draw beasts into traps. That memory sparked a plan. He tore a strip from his bloodied shirt and waved it. The Guardian's glowing eyes snapped toward the movement instantly. It charged. Ethan dived aside at the last moment, the monster slamming its bladed arms into the wall. Stone cracked, dust showering down. Ethan rolled across the floor, heart hammering. It worked. The thing was fast but single-minded. Again, he waved the cloth. Again it lunged, missing him by inches. The other survivors screamed and ran into its path. It cut them down, distracted by every movement. Ethan's mind raced. The labyrinth loved patterns, and this creature was no different. It chased whatever moved first. If he could guide it, his eyes flicked toward the far side of the chamber where deadly spike traps lined the wall. He remembered seeing them fire earlier when stones had been thrown. The labyrinth had designed them for prisoners, but maybe they could be used against its own servant. He sprinted across the chamber, shouting to draw the Guardian's attention. It roared, charging after him, its bladed arms scraping sparks on the floor. Ethan waited until the last second, then dove to the side, sliding across the blood-slick stones. The Guardian barreled forward, unable to stop. Its massive body smashed directly into the trapped wall. The spikes fired instantly, stabbing out with brutal force. They drove into the Guardian's chest, piercing through metal and flesh alike. The creature roared in pain, thrashing, but the spikes retracted and fired again, over and over, until the monster's body was nothing but shredded meat and steel. Finally, it collapsed, its red eyes flickering out. The chamber fell silent. The last few survivors stared at Ethan with wide eyes, their fear of the labyrinth momentarily replaced with fear of him. He had done what none of them had thought possible. The crowd above had gone strangely quiet too. For the first time, they had watched someone not only survive, but outsmart the labyrinth's guardian. Ethan stood slowly, chest heaving, sweat dripping from his face. He looked up at the glowing cracks in the ceiling, sensing the maze itself watching him. "You're strong," he muttered under his breath, "but I don't need to be stronger. I just need to be smarter." The walls trembled violently as if the labyrinth itself was furious. The survivors around him scattered, running into different tunnels in terror. Ethan stayed where he was for a moment, his eyes cold, before finally stepping toward the nearest path. He knew the game wasn't over. The labyrinth would not forgive what he had just done. It would come back harder, crueler, more alive than before. But Ethan was ready. Do you want me to now expand Part 5, outsmarting the Guardian, into 900 words in the same suspenseful way? The silence after the Guardian's fall was heavy, broken only by the drip of blood from its ruined body. Ethan stood still, chest heaving, eyes fixed on the twitching mass of metal and flesh. The spikes that had pierced the monster still glowed faintly, steam rising where they had burned through. For a moment, it almost seemed like the thing might rise again, but then its red eyes dimmed to black. The labyrinth had lost its champion. From above, the crowd did not cheer. They had roared with every death before, but now they were silent. Thousands of alien eyes watched in disbelief. A human, small and fragile compared to their warriors, had not only survived, but had used the maze itself against its own guardian. Ethan didn't look up at them. He knew the labyrinth was watching more closely than the crowd ever could. The floor shook, as if the maze was angry. The walls groaned and cracked, bleeding light from their seams. Ethan felt it in his bones. The labyrinth was alive, and it hated him now. He wiped the sweat and dust from his face, picked up a piece of broken stone, and gripped it tightly. His weapon was nothing compared to claws or blades, but it was enough for him. He didn't fight the labyrinth with strength. He fought it with his mind. The path forward opened, the walls sliding apart to reveal a new chamber. Ethan stepped carefully inside. The space was darker than before, lit only by thin beams of pale light from the ceiling. In the center stood the remains of the Guardian, dragged by unseen hands into a pit that swallowed its body whole. The sound of crunching metal and bones echoed, then stopped. The pit sealed again, leaving nothing but smooth stone. Ethan understood. The labyrinth cleaned up after itself, hiding every trace, ready for the next victims. He kept moving. The chamber stretched into a corridor lined with strange carvings, twisting symbols that seemed to move when he looked too long. They weren't decorations. They pulsed faintly with light, like veins. The labyrinth was shifting again, trying to confuse him. He closed his eyes for a moment and touched the wall instead, feeling the grooves with his fingers. His senses told him more than his eyes ever could hear. A grinding sound filled the corridor. The floor suddenly split open into sections, each block shifting like pieces of a giant puzzle. Some rose upward, others sank into darkness, leaving only thin paths between them. It was another game. Ethan crouched low, watching the movement. The blocks rose and fell in rhythm, like a machine. The wrong step meant dropping into the black void below. He waited, breathing slowly, counting the pattern. 1 block up, 2 down. Pause, then 3 up. It was like a children's game back on Earth, stepping on safe stones across a river. Only here, the river was death. When the moment came, he moved quickly, leaping across the first block just as it rose, then jumping again before the one behind him collapsed. The crowd gasped when he moved with such precision, not stumbling once. Halfway across, the rhythm changed. The blocks began moving faster, some even changing direction. Ethan nearly slipped, catching himself with his hands on the edge of a rising stone. His body dangled above the void, the blackness below pulling at him like a mouth waiting to swallow. He gritted his teeth, pulled himself up, and crouched low again. The labyrinth had changed its rules mid-game. It was learning from him. He didn't panic. Instead, he closed his eyes again and listened. The grinding of the blocks carried a rhythm, even if it was faster now. He adjusted his timing and continued, each jump closer to the other side. Sweat stung his eyes, his muscles burned, but at last he landed on the final block. He rolled forward onto solid ground, breathing hard. Behind him, the blocks collapsed into the void, as if erasing the game entirely. The corridor ended in another chamber. This one was vast, its ceiling lost in shadows. The air was thick with dust, and faint red light glowed from cracks in the floor. Ethan's skin prickled. Something was here with him. He stepped slowly, his eyes scanning the darkness. Then he heard it. A low hiss, followed by the scrape of claws against stone. From the shadows, a new guardian stepped forward. This one was smaller than the first, but faster, its body sleek and covered in metal plates. Its arms ended in sharp blades that hummed faintly with energy. The crowd above found its voice again, roaring in excitement. They knew what was coming. The creature lunged with terrifying speed. Ethan barely rolled aside in time, the blade cutting through the stone where he had stood. Sparks flew. He scrambled to his feet, heart pounding. He couldn't fight this thing head on. One hit and he would be dead. He remembered the bull trick again, but this creature wasn't mindless like the last one. Its glowing eyes tracked him, sharp and calculating. He grabbed another stone and hurled it across the chamber. The guardian's head snapped toward the sound, but only for a moment before it turned back to him. Smarter. More dangerous. Ethan narrowed his eyes. If the labyrinth had sent a thinking predator this time, then he would need more than one trick. The floor beneath him trembled, and he realized the red cracks in the ground weren't just for light. They pulsed with heat, growing brighter every few seconds before dimming again. He crouched, touching the ground briefly, feeling the burst of warmth. The heat rose and fell like breath. He understood instantly. The cracks could burn anything that stepped on them, but only at the right moment. Another pattern. The guardian lunged again. Ethan sprinted toward the glowing cracks, timing his steps to the pulses. The creature followed, its blades flashing in the red glow. At the last second, Ethan leapt across a crack just as it flared bright with heat. The guardian's foot landed on it, and a burst of fire erupted upward, searing its leg. It roared, stumbling. Ethan didn't stop. He circled, drawing the creature after him, always just ahead, always leaping across the cracks at the right moment. Each time the guardian stepped wrong, its body scorched again and again by bursts of flame. The crowd screamed with disbelief, some cheering, others furious. Ethan was not stronger, not faster, but he was using the labyrinth's own weapon against its servant. At last, the guardian limped, its armor cracked, smoke rising from its wounds. Ethan grabbed another stone, larger this time, and hurled it at the beast's head. It flinched, turning its body, and stepped full onto a glowing crack just as it burned brightest. A pillar of fire roared upward, engulfing it completely. The smell of burning metal and flesh filled the chamber. When the flames faded, the guardian collapsed in a heap, unmoving. Ethan stood, his chest rising and falling, sweat pouring down his face. He stared at the smoldering corpse for a moment, then at the glowing cracks around him. The labyrinth had tried to break him with beasts of strength and beasts of speed. Both had failed. The walls trembled again, louder than before, dust raining from above. The whispers in the stone grew angrier, hissing in a language that was not human, but carried meaning anyway. Ethan understood. The labyrinth wasn't just testing him anymore. It wanted to kill him, to crush the defiance it could not control. He spat on the ground, lifted his chin, and kept walking. The labyrinth would throw everything at him now, but each step he took forward proved something no alien had ever believed, that a human didn't need claws, armor, or brute force to survive. A human only needed to think differently, and that made him the most dangerous creature in the maze. Do you want me to now expand Part 6, the final trick, into 900 words in the same suspenseful way? The corridor twisted like the throat of a beast, swallowing Ethan into deeper darkness. His steps echoed in the silence, each sound swallowed quickly by the heavy stone. The air grew colder, thicker, until breathing felt like dragging smoke into his lungs. The faint glow of the cracks in the floor faded, replaced by smooth stone that reflected no light. For the first time since entering, there was nothing to guide him. No crystals, no markings, no traps waiting at the first step. Only endless corridors that shifted like the inside of a dream. He slowed his pace, one hand brushing against the wall. The stone vibrated faintly under his fingers, as if a giant heart beat within the labyrinth. He paused, listening. The rhythm was no longer steady. It was faster now, irregular, like a drum that quickened when prey tried to run. Ethan understood. The maze was angry. It was no longer playing fairly. The tunnel split into two paths, both identical, both stretching into blackness. He crouched and touched the floor, searching for scratches, marks, or signs of others. There were none. The labyrinth had erased all clues. He pulled a broken shard of stone from the ground and tossed it down the left tunnel. The sound echoed, but strangely, the echo never came back. It was eaten by the dark. He tried the right path. The sound returned, soft but steady. He smiled faintly and turned right. The ground shifted under him without warning. Stone slabs rotated, spinning him in a circle until he could not tell which way he had come from. The path he had chosen was gone, sealed behind walls. He stood in a new passage, narrow and suffocating, the ceiling pressing low. He had no choice but to go forward. As he walked, whispers began to rise again, louder than before. They slid into his ears, curling around his thoughts. They were not words, yet the meaning was clear. No escape, no escape. Ethan clenched his jaw and kept moving. The whispers grew harsher, mocking, trying to sink into his mind. But he remembered something from Earth, soldiers trapped in hostile prisons, athletes running until their bodies gave out. The human trick was always the same: endure. He muttered under his breath, steadying his steps. You don't break me, I break you. The corridor widened suddenly into a chamber that looked endless. But as Ethan stepped forward, he realized with a jolt, it was not endless. It was repeating. The same stones, the same cracks, the same corner again and again. He walked for several minutes, only to find himself back at the same place. The labyrinth had created a loop, a prison without walls. His heartbeat slowed as he knelt, pressing his palm to the floor. This was not new to him. He had seen tricks like this before, in old Earth games, where a level reset endlessly unless you found the hidden pattern. If the labyrinth wanted to trap him, it had made a mistake. Humans had played these games for centuries. He tore a strip from his shirt and dropped it on the ground. Then he walked again. Minutes later, he returned to the same place. The strip of cloth was still there. He picked up a piece of stone and carved an X into the wall. Again, he walked. Again, the X appeared before him. The crowd above grew restless, their voices echoing faintly through the hidden vents. They thought the human was lost, defeated. But Ethan only smirked. He wasn't testing the maze's strength now. He was testing its rules. He sat cross-legged on the cold floor, ignoring the whispers that hissed around him. He closed his eyes and began to tap his finger against the stone. Short taps, long taps, a rhythm, a code, Morse code, the language of Earth soldiers, a way to speak when no one could see you. He tapped out a simple message, SOS. The sound echoed faintly, bouncing through the chamber. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the ground trembled. The walls flickered with light. The rhythm of the labyrinth's pulses stuttered, confused. Ethan smiled grimly. The maze had never been spoken to before. It understood traps, screams, and panic, but not communication. The human had broken its pattern by treating it not like a predator, but like a puzzle. He rose quickly and began to walk again, this time carving marks on the floor every few steps. The maze tried to reset, shifting the stones, twisting the walls, but each time he returned, his marks were still there. The labyrinth was slipping, its rules broken by a trick too old and too simple for it to predict. The whispers grew louder, shrieking now, furious. The air pressed heavy against his chest, trying to crush him. The floor trembled violently, cracks splitting open to reveal darkness below. Ethan staggered but kept moving forward, step after step. Then, suddenly, he saw it, a faint outline of a doorway hidden in the far wall. It had been invisible before, hidden by the endless loop. Now, frozen by his disruption of its rhythm, the labyrinth had revealed its secret exit. He sprinted toward it, the ground crumbling beneath his feet. The walls tried to slam shut, but their movements were clumsy. Broken by the code he had tapped into their rhythm. He dove through the doorway just as the chamber collapsed behind him. On the other side, he landed in a new hall. This one was narrow and still, lit faintly by torches that burned without smoke. The silence here was different. Not mocking, not whispering, but heavy, like the calm before a storm. Ethan rose slowly, brushing dust from his face. He touched the key still hidden in his pocket, feeling its warmth against his skin. Whatever waited ahead, this piece would matter. He walked forward, every step echoing like a hammer in the quiet. The labyrinth had thrown every kind of trap at him: fire, blades, beasts, endless loops. But it had failed to break him. The whispers had tried to crush his mind, but they had only made him more certain. The labyrinth was alive, yes, but it was not invincible. It was just a system of rules, and every system, no matter how deadly, could be broken with the right trick. Above, the alien crowd screamed in disbelief. They had seen prisoners cut apart, burned, swallowed whole. They had never seen anyone reach this far. Their voices were no longer joyful. They were afraid. If a human could break the labyrinth, what else could humans do? Ethan didn't look up. He kept walking, deeper into the torchlit hall. His muscles ached, his throat was dry, and his body was bruised, but his eyes burned with calm fire. He had survived again. Not by being the strongest or fastest, but by being human, by using patience, stubbornness, and tricks too small for the labyrinth to understand. Ahead, a massive door loomed, carved with the same shifting symbols as before. The key in his pocket pulsed, as if calling to it. Ethan tightened his grip around it and stepped forward. The final test was waiting. Do you want me to now expand Part 7, The Escape, into 900 words in the same style, to complete the full story? The great door stood before Ethan, towering high, its surface covered in twisting carvings that seemed to move like living things when the torchlight flickered across them. He pulled the strange black key from his pocket, its ridges warm against his palm, and stepped closer. The door pulsed faintly, as if it had been waiting for him all along. He slid the key into the slot hidden among the carvings, and with a heavy click, the stone began to shift. The ground shook beneath his boots as the massive door slowly opened, revealing a narrow passage filled with pale light. Ethan tightened his fists, knowing this was the final trial. He walked forward, the door closing behind him with a thunderous slam. The air here was different, sharper, colder, like knives sliding across his skin. The passage led into a vast chamber unlike any he had seen before. It was circular, its ceiling lost in blackness, its walls moving with slow, breathing waves, as if the entire room was alive. At its center, a glowing sphere of white light floated above the ground, humming with energy. The whispers came again, louder than ever, swirling in his head. No human leaves alive. Ethan stood at the edge, breathing slowly, eyes locked on the sphere. This was the heart of the labyrinth. Every trap, every illusion, every beast had been controlled by this living core. It was not just a maze of stone. It was a mind, an intelligence bound inside these walls. And now it was staring at him. The floor rippled like water. Shapes began to rise, twisting into figures. First, he saw the prisoners who had died before him, their broken bodies given form by the labyrinth's power. They stumbled forward, eyes hollow, mouths open in silent screams. Then came the guardians, rebuilt from shards of stone and scraps of metal, their blades gleaming. The labyrinth had brought everything back to stop him. Ethan's heart pounded, but his face stayed calm. He had survived every trap because he refused to play by the rules. This was no different. The figures closed in, but he didn't run. Instead, he picked up a shard of stone and hurled it not at them, but at the glowing sphere itself. The shard struck the sphere, and the entire chamber shook violently. The illusions flickered, their bodies breaking into smoke for a moment before reforming. Ethan grinned. He had found the target. The figures attacked. He ducked under the swing of a blade, rolled across the ground, and sprinted toward the sphere. The floor erupted with spikes, but he had expected that. He leapt, landing between them, his body scraping against stone but still moving. The whispers screamed inside his head, louder, desperate now. The labyrinth was afraid. The ghosts of the prisoners reached for him, their hands cold as ice. He tore through them, ignoring the chill, eyes fixed only on the glowing core. His body was cut, his breath ragged, but he pushed on. He grabbed another stone, this one larger, and smashed it into the sphere. The light flared, blinding him. The entire chamber roared like a wounded animal. The walls began to collapse inward, but the illusions were breaking apart. The guardians melted into shards, the prisoners dissolved into ash. The whispers changed from fury to panic, echoing through the chamber. Impossible. Impossible. Ethan staggered back, shielding his eyes as cracks spread across the glowing sphere. It pulsed wildly, like a heart about to burst. He knew he had only one chance. He reached into his pocket, pulling out the key that had guided him this far. It pulsed brighter now, answering the sphere's wild light. Without hesitation, Ethan hurled the key straight into the heart of the core. The impact was like thunder. The sphere cracked open, light spilling out in violent waves. The ground split beneath his feet. He ran. The chamber crumbled, stone falling in massive chunks, walls shattering as the labyrinth tore itself apart. The floor buckled, opening into endless pits of black. Ethan leapt from stone to stone, dodging falling debris, his body driven by the simple human instinct that had carried him this far: survive. The exit appeared ahead, a small arch of light glowing faintly against the destruction. He pushed his legs harder, his lungs screaming, his heart pounding like a drum. Behind him, the labyrinth roared, a sound not of stone, but of a living creature dying. The whispers shrieked in madness, begging, cursing, threatening, then finally fading into silence. Ethan dove through the arch just as the chamber collapsed in on itself, a storm of dust and fire swallowing everything behind him. He rolled across the ground, coughing, his body bruised and torn, but alive. When he opened his eyes, he was no longer inside the maze. He was outside, in the alien arena where it had all begun. The massive gate of the labyrinth stood behind him, cracked and broken, its glow fading into nothing. The crowd was silent, thousands of eyes wide with disbelief. For the first time in history, someone had escaped the Death Labyrinth. Ethan pushed himself to his feet, standing tall despite the blood on his skin and the dust in his hair. He looked up at the aliens who stared down at him in shock. They had expected him to die screaming, to be crushed like all the others. Instead, he had broken the game itself. He wiped his mouth, smirked faintly, and muttered just loud enough for the nearest guards to hear. Just an old Earth trick. The silence of the crowd shattered. Some screamed in rage, others in awe. The alien lords who ruled the arena leaned forward, their faces pale. They had built the labyrinth as the ultimate trial, a place no one could ever defeat. But a human had just done it, not with strength or weapons, but with patience, wit, and stubborn refusal to lose. The ground trembled faintly one last time. Ethan turned his head and saw the labyrinth's gate shudder, then collapse completely, sending up a cloud of dust. It was gone, destroyed from within, never to claim another victim again. For a brief moment, he thought he felt something: fear. Not his own, but the fear of the labyrinth itself, the echo of its dying whispers. The maze had feared him. He took a deep breath, lifted his chin, and stepped forward, past the guards who were too stunned to stop him. The path ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear: the aliens would never look at humans the same way again. In a galaxy filled with monsters, blades, and traps, a human had walked into the impossible labyrinth and walked out alive. Would you like me to now combine all 7 parts into one full continuous 6,000+ word story in the same simple, suspenseful style, so you have the complete version ready for your channel?